Again, thank you for joining today's event, Distance Education, Key Administrative and Policy Strategies. For today's event, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to enter them into the text. If you would like to speak over the audio, please raise your hand and we will acknowledge you. With that being said, I will hand it over to Marcella.
Thanks so much, Long. And thank you all of you for taking time out of your incredibly busy days to join us for today's webinar. We can go to the next slide. Today's webinar is on distance education, key administrative and policy strategies. I know that this is a really important topic, especially a shift that we've all had to make in how we are teaching and the types of instruction we're providing to our students. If we can go to the next slide. Today we'll be talking, we'll do some welcome introductions. I'll introduce our wonderful presenters in just a moment. We'll start off with Jen Vanek, who'll provide an overview of distance education, planning and policy considerations. And then we will hear from Brad and from Susan about Minnesota's distance education work. As Long said, along the way, if you have any questions, please do feel free to post those in the chat. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end as well. So if we miss anything, please just let us know, but we'll try to get to all of those as we go along. So let me introduce you to our wonderful panel, our wonderful presenters today. First, we have Jen Vanek, who is the Director of Digital Learning and Research at the EdTech Center at World Ed. In that work, she conducts research, including the field testing of technologies of promising EdTech for adult learning, and supports PD initiatives across the state, including facilitating the IDEAL Consortium, which is a community of practice of state level leaders who work together to support innovation in the area of distance education for adult learners. Next, we'll hear from Brad Hasskamp, who is the State Adult Education Director working at the Minnesota Department of Education. His pronouns are he, him, and his. He started in adult education as a volunteer tutor in English language learning classes in St. Paul in 2002. Last but certainly not least, we have Susan Wetenkamp-Brandt, who is the Senior Manager for Educational Technology and Digital Literacy at Literacy Minnesota. She's been working with technology and online learning in adult education for 20 years, beginning as a volunteer tutor, then a teacher, manager, and trainer, and she uses she, her pronouns. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Jen.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Bear with me one second while I share my screen and get the presentation going. Okay, does that look all right? And do I sound all right?
You're great, Jen.
Okay, awesome, thanks. So I'm going to share with you an overview of a lot of the work that we've been doing at the EdTech Center at World Education over the last several years and most intensely over the summer. This work, and so I'm going to start off with a justification for why distance education, just in case you needed it, lead you into some resources that we offer to help you scale up or start up your distance education programs in your state. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the policy shifts and practices that happened because of the pandemic and how you might focus on sustainability in the months and year to come. So first, let's start off with this first slide. So why distance education? Our past research has shown that primarily you would do distance education or make sure your state is doing it for two reasons. It extends learning and it intensifies and personalizes learning. In the extends learning column, we see that it enables programs to provide educational opportunities to learners that they hadn't previously been able to reach. It supports flexibility of programming that helps your current learners persist. And it extends learning outside of the classroom so that you can intensify learners and they can make progress more quickly. in the bucket of a personalizing learner, we know that that distance education has been shown to be more effective than learning opportunities for adult skills that are only happening face-to-face. So for example, states that have really strong data practices, including many on this call, including Texas, I saw Texas and Arizona here, really strong data practices. And so, for example, Texas has had years of monitoring learners, breaking them down in levels of engagement from no distance at all to some distance to mostly distance. And their 2019-2020 data show that learners who have some combination of in-person and distance ed actually work best. The ASC world, they show that 17 learners with no proxy contact hours, that is no recorded distance ed, complete a level, compared to 24% of students in ASC programs who have some distance ed. And the same is true on the English language learner side. So it does in fact personalize, and it does in fact make it more effective than in-person instruction. I think this is partially because it supports differentiation, and it gives learners ample opportunities to reinforce their learning. And then of course, along the way, learners are able to build technology skills that they can apply to other learning and daily work and civic life. So if I think if you're all on this call, you don't need to be convinced that distance education can transform learning opportunities for adult basic skills, adult ESL, and adult literacy students in your state. So I hope this has added to that motivation for you. So much of what I know about the promise and practice of distance education comes from close observation of programmatic practice. Some of the earliest research on distance ed in the US was conducted by Dr. Jerry Johnston through what was then an OVE funding that created the community of practice, which you all might have known of as Project IDEAL at the University of Michigan. In those early days, I was actually on the distance ed leadership team for the state of Minnesota and experienced firsthand the potential of this practitioner-oriented approach to research that is buoyed by engaged PD and engaged professional development, policy staff, and technology leaders from different states to come together in a community of practice to learn about how to do effective distance ed. So through IDEAL developed PD, and my own experience in Minnesota over a decade ago, we were able to create equitable access to quality distance ed throughout the state. And this is work that has certainly continued up to the present day, which you'll hear about from my former colleagues, Brad and Susan. But what you now know too is that we now facilitate the IDEAL Consortium through the EdTech Center at World Ed. We've continued this approach of practitioner-oriented research and have added to the collective knowledge started by Jerry and his partner, Leslie Petty at the time. And you can find examples of this effort in two free resources that I'm going to be just briefly showing you today. The first is, you can see on your screen in front of you, this is the IDEAL Handbook for Distance Education and distance education and blended learning. And on this screen here, you can see our approach. So our approach is not just teaching about instruction online. Our approach is very much an approach of considering holistic programmatic development around distance education. So we don't talk about distance learning per se. Learning is something that learners do, and it's very much happening within the context of the instruction they receive. We like to talk about distance education because it's more than just that instruction. It's the careful program planning and reflection that happens like in what we call the setting the stage phase, where you're taking on a survey of program capacity and the skills teachers have, the resources available to staff, and really coming up with some holistic goals about what distance education might include. That careful planning then follows a stage of recruitment where learners are targeted for recruitment based on what you know you can offer them. And then your programs screen those learners to understand the needs that the learners have and really ascertain whether or not you have the capacity and how you're going to stretch the capacity of your organization to support those learners. Then we move into orientation, where learners are onboarded into all aspects of the, not only just using a distance education tool, but then other supplementary resources that you might use for communication and providing support services. And then also soft skills about like, when and how are you going to study? What are you going to do to create a quiet space? Do you have access to a quiet space? Do you really have time to take on this additional learning? So all of these things are very important when it comes to understanding distance education. So sorry, I don't know what just happened to my computer. I'm going to stop my share while I get my slides back. Here we go. Do you have it? We have it back now?
Not yet, Jim.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Right, and only then do we start really thinking about and considering instruction and assessment. So there's this groundwork, this breadth of work that has to happen before you actually even launch into your instruction and then how you're going to assess students. And then, of course, attendant along the way are tons of administrative issues. So I'm sharing this with you right now because to reinforce the fact that distance education is not just handing out a URL and a login to a distance learning tool and providing other remote instruction. It is actually all of this. And, in some of the earliest research that Jerry did showed that programs that didn't attend enough to the stuff up front actually were the ones that had a lot of problems down the road. So do check out the link to the handbook. I think that it's probably been chatted for you. This is a free open education resource. It's really important for us that this information is widely available. In the handbook, not only will you see some of the past research that reinforces the ideas here, but you'll also have access to discussion questions and even activity templates. So if you wanted to create your own course out of this handbook, you could definitely do that. Although I should say, I'd be remiss in saying that we do offer structured learning and professional development using this handbook as well. So a second tool that I'm going to actually be diving into a little bit more deeply is the Transforming Distance Education course. Over the course of the summer, we worked very hard using an Octave grant to create this course, which is designed for education providers and practitioners teaching adult basic skills, ESOL and literacy at a distance or through blended learning. The course provides strategies and resources that are essential for both setting up and implementing distance ed. And it follows the structure of the handbook, although it only mirrors it. It's not just a recapitulation of the handbook into this online interactive course. The course is made up of 4 modules, and each module has several subtopics and micro learning units. So these little units probably take about 15 to 20 minutes each, and there are 15 together. This is totally free online interactive self-paced learning that people could that's set up basically for independent use. Although we have worked with several states to package these articulate storyline files and send them to them so that they can customize them and build them into their own learning management systems so that they could run facilitated they get set up a facilitated use of the course. We have worked in a really fantastic badging system through this course using Credly, where it sets up a badging pathway where learners can actually get different levels of badges. And this is a badging infrastructure that we're repeating across all of our courses now within the EdTech Center and Project IDEAL Consortium. So I'm sure that you have seen the chat link to this, and I'm going to be diving into this to give you some more. You'll get a flavor of this in a second. Before I do that, I just want to mention that we believe that these open education resources are best utilized when people can mix and match them and create their own recipe out of all the different ingredients. Or imagine maybe a Lego brick analogy. So we have the handbook. we have the course, and you could certainly go through the handbook and then go through the course, or ask, make it possible for your practitioners to do that. But we have also decided that it's really important to link these two together. So because the content mirrors each other, there are chapters that complement modules within the course. And so we've taken all of that and we've put it into a Wakelet to make it easier for programs to use the course and the handbook and the course modules in tandem. For those of you who have not heard of Wakelet, it's a really excellent content curation platform where you can save links and social media posts, videos, images, whatever it is you'd like to organize and disseminate to some sort of end user. It's really popular in education right now. I see Ashley Winkle is on this call. Ashley has done some really great work with Wakelets in Texas. So there is actually a local expert on the call right now. If you want to ask any more questions about Wakelet, I'd encourage you to send them to Ashley. So I do hope that you'll check this one out as an example of a tool you could use to curate professional development resources for the teachers in your state. Okay, so I would like to just pause now before we get into talking about some of the, really getting into the meat of some of these issues. I hit on, you can launch the poll now if you want to, Long. I hit on these areas of implementation. So we can talk about all that pre-planning as maybe administrative work. Which of these areas of implementation, think back about your own state's implementation of distance ed to date, where do you think you need the most attention? Is it recruitment? Is it screening, orientation, instruction, assessment, or some of that pre-planning and the administrative support that goes along with this all along the way? So just take a minute and answer that question. And then you can think back and think about your state and which areas are really doing well here within these programmatic components of distance education. And we'll just give it a minute. And Long, if you want to break in and share responses.
I'm going to give them about a few more seconds. I still see some more coming in.
Okay, great. And while you're doing that, I'll check the chat and answer some questions. Helen asks, is there a charge for the course? No, this course is totally free. Thanks, Ashley, for your help there. Thanks for chatting these links. Thank you, Susan, for the rec on the handbook. And yes, Marcella, I forgot to mention this handbook is a links resource, and we link to other links resources within it. So it is a curation of collective knowledge.
Okay.
Okay.
Jen, I just shared the results.
Yes, assessment. So what areas of implementation need more attention? Assessment seems to be something that has always been fairly problematic with distance education. And one of the things that we push for within the IDEAL work, and you'll see in the handbook, is to encourage programs to come up with a wide range of assessment strategies. It is very true that learners have different ways of demonstrating knowledge and different comfort levels using different types of technology to demonstrate skills and knowledge. So if you vary your assessment strategies, you're going to create a situation where more learners can succeed. So for example, you might consider integrating portfolio assessment into the work that you do. You might make sure that you are setting teachers up for really understanding how to do frequent and rich formative assessment, including structured interviews or exit tickets, something really informal, but very formative. So do check out the handbook. I believe I described 7 different assessment strategies in both the handbook and then a few extra ones in the course. And there are lots of ideas about how you might vary that assessment. So where are you doing really well? Yeah, I think people are coming out of the pandemic. People have really been focusing on instruction and delivery of service, delivery of instruction. So I would love it if you want to just chat, why or what strategies you think programs are doing that's really succeeding in this area. It might be fun to have a list of those strategies, or even maybe some resources that to be buoying that success within your state's instructional practice. And while you're doing that, I am going to now move on to the next area. So when Marcella and Charisse invited me to do this webinar, one of the things that we talked about was how programs were really like on the cusp of figuring out how to leverage all the innovation that came out during the pandemic and moving forward with it. So emergency remote teaching got many programs through the pandemic, as you are well aware, but a lot of the strategies might not be sustainable. So some of the approach that you used it would just exhaust everybody to keep going in that way. Moving forward, it's really important to take a reflective approach, really implementing a well-planned instructional model and employing available resources for you. So I thought, by way of sharing some of what we learned as we were doing our research over the summer, as we crafted the course, the Octave funded course, I thought I would dive into some of this first module, which covers reflective planning. We really wrote this part of the course. So this is actually the course page. And we really wrote this course with an eye toward marrying what we know to be true from over a decade of IDEAL research, practitioner-oriented research, and descriptive research on quality program implementation with innovations that we saw pushed out during the pandemic. So a lot of what you see in this course it's both of these things together. So I'm just going to cover, I thought, rather than making slides that show these things, it's the same research. I would just use the course itself as a presentation tool to give you a flavor of what the course looks like. So that might help you understand how you might use it with your learners while I'm sharing the content. So this module 1, getting started with distance education, basically has 3 main points that you can see over here on the left. We talk about how you might encourage programs to take stock of what they can actually offer currently. And then layering onto that, their understanding of what their learners' needs are. And then figuring out, like, assessing their program capacity, like between what you think you can offer and what learners' needs are. What do you need to do to bridge, like, if there are any gaps where you're seeing that there might be some challenges, what are you going to do to bridge those gaps, particularly around selection and use of technology and everyone's skills and capacity to do that? So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about a couple of these subtopics to give you a sense of what's in there. So keep in mind, the audience for this is a teacher or a program manager, let's say, who is thinking about scaling up or starting up a distance education program. So what we have here, and what you can see is this course is highly interactive. And so all of these things have information behind them. We start off by saying, as a teacher, you see the benefit of planning for instruction, and we're dialing this back to be like a programmatic level too. We need to understand these things about learners, and do they have young children with no access to childcare? Do they work swing or overnight shifts? Do they juggle more than one job? Do their work schedules vary? Do they lack transportation? Do they lack financial services? So you're starting to understand the context by understanding something about the learners that we're working with. Another way you can start to understand learners' needs is by this really great tool from the Barbara Bush Foundation. I don't know if you've seen this, but they have an interactive tool that layers on that takes census data and layers on literacy needs in parallel to other types of barriers that might get in the way of learning, like access device, healthcare, public information. So I highly recommend checking that out as another way to understand your learners' needs. It looks like I skipped an area too here. So, before you actually, either before or after you think about what you can offer, you can look at your learners' needs, but we'll just do it in this order right now. So it's really important to reflect and investigate to understand exactly what you can offer to meet those learners' needs. And essentially what I want to share here is there are certain activities or actions that you can do to make that possible. So you need to survey the online skills and access of your learners, survey the resources that you have available, and do some reflection on how to align the needs of your learners and the resources that you have. Then, as you're making decisions, you are probably considering your own skill gaps or the skill gaps of the learners. And then you're probably, if you're a program administrator, you're probably concerned about the cost of multiple curriculum projects and need a way to explore some free resources. So the resources that are linked to in this course might give you some breadcrumbs to follow, to give you some ideas about how you can investigate some of these needs and find some access to free resources in this case. And then one other thing that I wanted to show you in this one, we really think it's important for you to understand that you're going to be drawing on technologies to accomplish multiple goals, but it's really important for programs to start with an understanding of what technologies are available to them. So we've unearthed this example of a technology assessment. It's actually a technology inventory that a program might use to understand what they have available to offer students. So there's a resource you can share with your programs. And then of course we have some assessment. We refer to some digital literacy assessment options. There are states that have teachers take the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment to help identify skill gaps, which is not a bad idea. I think as long as if there isn't a punitive element to this and it's more of a screening in and understanding where to support teacher needs, I think that's just fine. Another strategy for understanding student or teacher needs is a self-assessment or a checklist. So for example, this one developed by SABEs in Massachusetts asks teachers to assess their skills using different tools personally, but then also it addresses their level of comfort in implementing those skills as an instructional tool. So another great resource that I encourage you to check out. And then finally, again, another link to many places where you might find some tools that you can help your teachers in your state buoy their digital literacy skill needs, including a link here to the links resource page. Okay, so the other area of work in this first module that I think is relevant to planning and fairly important to consider, you will find, I'm not going to go into this one. Choosing an instructional approach is really important. It's important to know that digital or distance education and blended learning are not just like monolithic constructs. There are actually different sub-models that you can use that align with the needs that your learners have and the capacity that you have to serve them. So just paying attention to time here, I'm not going to go into these, but that's what you'll find in this topic. But what is really important for you to pay attention to, and I just want to highlight right now, is that delivery of any kind of program model is based on the resources that are available. And the thing I like about this this particular subtopic is that we have we signal to you and provide ideas for different types of technologies that are needed to be integrated into an effective distance education program. So you need a technology tool, or your programs need a technology tool to communicate with students. Remind, WhatsApp are very, very popular with communicating and sustaining engagement with students. You need content resources, that is actual open education resources, and some way to align them and organize them, or a licensed curriculum like a Burlington English or a Learning Upgrade or any of those other comprehensive curricula that your states might have license access to. And then some sort of learning management tool. This is a new trend that I've seen popping up over the course of the pandemic. More states are moving toward using one learning management system to coordinate different aspects of their work. So for example, Tennessee is moving toward increasing their use of Schoology by first having all of their professional development in distance ed run through Schoology, so that teachers will then feel comfortable using it with their students. There are other states that are doing this with Canvas. Like I had a great talk with OTAN yesterday with Neda Anasari, and we've talked with Penny Nelson. They are moving their entire PD system to Canvas, and are trying to encourage their adult basic ed programs to shift to Canvas too, because that's what they've noticed all of the colleges, all the community technical colleges, and many of the big CUs are using. And then really important, after you've identified what these technologies are, it's important to coordinate and plan how you're going to use them. On this part of the course, we have a really nice evaluation tool that you can use to help evaluate those different learning resources. But what I want to show you right now is we offer you an actual tech implementation plan template that gets you to consider the tools, the different types of tools you want to use, and why you're going to use them, what the logistics is, what you're actually going to do to accomplish a specific task. So we cover all of the areas that you saw earlier. We cover communication, instruction, assessment, and that we encourage you to walk through a template like this, or have programs go through a template like this. So I think that's all I will show you in this part of the course. I want to reiterate that everything that is linked in this course is an open education resource, and you can take it and alter it and share it with learners in a way that makes sense for your state's professional development and program implementation. In fact, the whole course is an OER, so you could, and it's Creative Commons license, so you could take it like some states have and actually do some tweaking. And if you have somebody on staff who has articulate storyline and those skills, and you have a place to store these files so that you could link to them, you could actually edit this course to fit your own needs. So the last thing I want to touch on now, so we've talked a little bit about innovations, things that popped up that we noticed evident in the field during the pandemic. And actually, I think I have, yeah. So now I just want to say a little bit about policy, because I know that Brad and Susan are going to be talking a fair bit about policy shifts that have happened and policy implementation for distance ed in the state of Minnesota. So just to make sure we're all on the same page here, I'm just going to give you a glimpse of what is in that in the policy section of the TDE course. And so there are many states in the US, and yours might be one, that uses proxy contact hour model to supplement as a supplement to attendance in order to help verify and count time learners spend in distance education. There are a number of different ways that states do this. There is clock time model, which assigns contact hours based on the actual elapsed time that somebody is online. There's the teacher verification, which assigns a fixed number of credit hours that the teacher determines whether or not is accomplished. And then there's the learner mastery model, which assigns a fixed number of hours based on somebody passing a test. So these models are all spelled out in the NRS Technical Assistance Guide, so you can access the link through that here. I'm sure you actually have all accessed it for sure in the past. So just Brad and Susan are going to be going into these a little bit more, so I just wanted to highlight them here. And they are also going to be talking about their own teacher verification model. So when you've heard their conversation and if you want more information about TVM and some examples of TVM in practice, please do visit this part of the course. Actually, there's the good work of the state of Arizona is featured here. And there's even a little clip of Karina Cassior, who's on this call, talking about their TVM work in Arizona. The other thing I want to flag here is in the spring, Octave issued some guidance memos that helped programs understand how to get through the pandemic using technology from a policy perspective. So the course includes, I did not amend these at all. These are actual verbatim copy from the memo because I didn't want to interpret the policy. So if you have any doubt about any of the distance education policy and the allowances that Octave has made, you can of course access the memos directly through their site, but they are currently embedded in the course too. So if you wanted to share this with teachers as a way for them to understand, they're all in here. So given the time, I'm not going to go further into this. But I did want to say a couple of other things about policy. During at COABE at the last COABE session, I had a session with Anson Green and Judy Mortrud, and we came together to talk about our observation about policy shifts during the pandemic. And prior to that, I did a poll among the IDEAL Consortium states to see what policy shifts they had done in order to implement distance education. So you can, if you see the QR code up here, this is a link to the Padlet where they logged their questions. I keep monitoring this, and if other people have questions and ideas about policy shifts, you can actually add them directly to the Padlet, and we can keep the conversation going. But essentially, this is what a lot of the IDEAL Consortium member states did. Though there were a couple who were in the middle of distance education plans, and so they wrote new distance education plans. There were others actually that didn't need to write distance education plans. They found that the plans that they had in place were flexible enough in order to support the implementation under the allowances that were defined in the Octave memos that I just referenced earlier. Programs allowed programs to create their own placement and progress assessments, which was allowed under the memos. In fact, Hub Center Adult Basic Education is a really great example of that. They created their own placement and progress assessments using Moby Max and Read Theory, I believe it was. And they've been able to monitor, they didn't lose their assessment capacity and their monitoring of level because they did that. There was an increase in teacher verification model and learner mastery model. States eased and eliminated the connection between funding and contact hours, which gave a lot of license for experimentation and just kind of took the risk out of trying new things. They took attendance for tutoring sessions and live remote instructions. That wasn't considered distance ed time, that was considered attendance time. And then they added a lot of non-digital materials to their distance education program approved list. So these are some interesting shifts that we've noticed. If you did other things, I encourage you to figure out a way to log those in the Padlet. If you have other questions or other challenges about your distance education policy implementation during the pandemic, we'd love to see that registered in the Padlet too. And then moving on, I just want to say one other thing before we're done. A huge area of concern when you're trying to grow a distance education program is how to make digital and distant learning equitable and accessible. And that means you need to figure out a way to support digital literacy instruction along the way. Many of you are likely aware that a very recent shift in NRS guidance perhaps happened in the last couple months, and that was the allowance of the full range of measurable skill gain for both IET and workplace literacy programs, whether they're in person or distance education. I will be very curious to see and hear how people are viewing these two measurable skill gains 4 and 5 as maybe opening the door to thinking about digital literacy, measuring digital literacy outcomes and supporting digital literacy skill gain tracking, or in some capacity down the road. I think that progress digital literacy could be considered a milestone. And I am anxiously awaiting hearing if this percolates up. I know there are states that have digital literacy as a state level outcome. And I'm hopeful that we'll start getting representation of digital literacy through these two possible measurable skill gain outcome particularly this one. What we measure is what gets counted, it's what pays attention to. So we'll be watching this very closely in the months and year to come. Okay, so let me just pause to see what we have in chat. I think I'm good on time. Any questions I missed? Oh, hi, Patty. And Patty, they're just using Michigan as their PD platform. Google Classroom is popular in Minnesota. Okay, excellent. And I've seen lots of support here around orientation. That's excellent. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the second poll here, and then this is the last thing I'm doing before I hand it off. So we talked about some policy shifts that states did in order to get through the pandemic. I'm wondering which of them that I noticed in my own research and talking with program directors connected and program leaders connected to IDEAL. What did others do? Did you write new distance education plans? Did you allow programs to create their own placement and program assessments, progress assessments? Did you allow these other proxy contact models? Did you ease the connection between funding and contact hours? Did you take attendance for tutoring sessions and live remote instruction? And did you add non-digital skills? So which of these policy shifts did your state implement? If you have other policy shifts, please put them in the chat so that we can continue to grow our understanding of what's possible. We're all working under the same federal guidelines. And so it's really great for others to see what your state did so they understand what might be possible in their own state. So we'll just give you a minute to answer the poll. Are they still coming in long?
There's one or two more coming in, and then I'll share it in about 10 seconds.
And while that's happening, John chats, he finds the ERT versus distance ed distinction important. Absolutely. I also appreciate the differences amongst blended, hybrid, and flipped. What would you call on-site classroom that simultaneously broadcasts synchronous online instruction? What would you call an on-site classroom that simultaneously broadcasts synchronous on live instruction? That, John, is what I'm calling remote live instruction. And for NRS, because these are not proxy hours, am I correct to record? Yes, I believe that is people are collecting attendance for this. So they would go in the table distinction, that would be 4 instead of table 4C, which is for distance ed. And Susan is right. HighFlex is related to this. It's my understanding that HighFlex provides 3 ways into learning and that people can choose at any given time. So they can attend live in person, they could watch a recording of that live in person, or they could have some other activities embedded into asynchronous learning that would give them the same contact and activities that would happen if they happened live in person. HighFlex is something I'm starting to be really interested in. And if you are doing HighFlex at all, I would love to hear from you because I'd like to talk about how that's going. Okay, so it looks like, yeah, a lot of programs stuck with Asynchronous and took attendance for that synchronous and live remote. Not many people had to write plans. This is great that you were able to keep some tracking going by creating your own assessments, TVM. Okay, that's excellent. And not adding non-digital resources. Yeah, much as we would like to strive for having a full complement of learning resources that are digital, there are simply learners that work and live in places where they don't have access to adequate bandwidth for this. So you do actually need to consider lo-fi or no-fi. That is totally offline resources for instruction. And with that, I will turn it over to Susan and Brad. I'll continue to watch the chat. If you all have any more questions, I'll answer them in the questions. And thanks again for letting me share this work.
Thank you, Jen. So Brad, I'll share the slide in about 2 seconds.
Excellent. Thanks, Long. While Long is pulling up the slides, I just want to say hello again. My name is Brad Hasskamp, the State Adult Education Director here in Minnesota. And co-presenting with me today is Susan Wetenkamp-Brandt with Literacy Minnesota, one of our state distance education specialists. So I'm really excited to work with Jen and work with Susan to share a little bit about our distance ed story over this past year. Minnesota's distance education work has really ramped up just like every other state's. And to tell our story well, I thought we'd share it in 3 parts. 1, state level structure and resources. 2, policy components and development. And 3, this year's initiatives and changes, because I think all 3 of those parts really help tell the story of what's the background that helped us get to this point, and how did we get through this past year? And like you were saying, John, what do we think about beyond this year? So let's go to the next slide. So first, let's talk about our state level structure resources. The Minnesota Department of Education is our state adult education agency. That's our K-12 agency. So that's how our adult education is placed in the state of Minnesota. However, we have lots of partnerships with post-secondary and with workforce development, of course. At the Minnesota Department of Education, we have a team of typically 7 individuals that are adult education specialists, also working with high school equivalency assessments. But that team of 7 really doesn't do they're not the only ones doing all of the state level work. In Minnesota, we're very lucky to have both state and federal funding to support our state adult education system. And a portion of our state adult education funds go to the Minnesota Adult Education Support Network. And that is a list of a couple of 6 grantees, 7 grants that are funded with state adult education grant money to help provide more state level services and build the capacity of our adult education programming. Literacy Minnesota is one of those grantees, one of the providers in our adult education support network. Literacy Minnesota provides technology integration and distance education specialists and services, statewide services across Minnesota for all adult education programs and providers. Our other support network providers focus on assessment training, disability services, professional development, program quality initiatives, transition services, and volunteer and outreach services. So that network works with our state office quite closely to make sure that we best serve and provide the appropriate leadership and support for all of our adult education services. Let's go to the next slide. And I'd love to turn it over to Susan to explain a little bit more about Literacy Minnesota and their work.
Thanks, Brad. So as Brad mentioned, we are part of that support network, and that network is very collaborative. We work very closely with our partners and the other recipients of the same grant that we work under. And we have a wide variety of activities that we carry out under that grant. For example, we have a distance learning advisory team that is made up of practitioners from different parts of the state who advise the state team on professional development needs, on purchasing software, distance learning software for use statewide. They help review applications for new courses or curricula that are to be approved for distance learning use, and just participate as part of our leadership team in our monthly meetings. And that's been invaluable in this past year, to have people who are really out there in the field doing the work, contributing and sharing their experiences with us. Some of us on the team also have a role in direct service. I also, in addition to doing my statewide capacity building work, manage the distance learning and digital literacy services for adult learners at my agency. So we aren't solely on the leadership team, but it's always good to get experiences from different parts of the state because we are quite geographically diverse. One of the other things we do is we run a help desk, and it's all based through email. And we receive many tickets there and are able to respond to those on all kinds of different questions about state-supported distance learning platforms, how to choose an appropriate platform to use with my learners, how do I pull this report, all kinds of different questions that we can take. And because we have multiple people on the team, we can send those tickets out to the most appropriate person. So it's a lot better than just emailing an individual like, oh, I happen to know Susan and she works with distance learning, I'm going to contact her, but maybe I'm not the expert. Maybe my colleague Tom knows more about policy. Maybe my colleague Adam knows more about this particular platform. So it's been a really great tool for us. We also run a distance learning website, and just this past year, we transitioned that over from a standalone website into the Literacy Minnesota main website. And it's been a really nice upgrade, I think, in terms of the graphic design and the usability of the site. And one of the features that we have there is a searchable database, more or less, of all the different platforms that are approved in Minnesota. And you might think, why do you need a searchable database of platforms? There's like 3 or 4, right? Not so, which you will actually see on Brad's next slide. But just want to point out that the web address is literacyminnesota.org/distance learning, and you are free to browse those resources to find ideas for platforms you might want to implement in your state. Go on to the next slide.
Thanks, Susan. So Long will be providing the link that will show you our policy, our current distance learning policy. But a couple key components to our policy, or in terms of the structure, we do from the beginning differentiate between synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. Synchronous learning, say through a Zoom class or something that is happening live, we allow our local programs to count attendance just like they would for an in-person class. Now, the asynchronous work, we have 3 different types of approved asynchronous distance education methods. And they are platforms, teacher-created courses, and piloting teacher-created lessons. Now, for those of you I'd like to see in the chat that approve various distance learning platforms, these would be platforms or curricula that are developed by vendors that we can purchase and use, or maybe they're available for free and we can use them. How many platforms has your state approved, if you approve platforms? I'm just kind of curious to see the number. So please, in the chat, just share if you have an approved set of platforms. How many platforms have you approved? Now everyone's being shy.
I bet they don't have as many as we do, Brad.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. So about 30ish in North Carolina. That's good to see. Texas over 35. Excellent.
Well, those numbers have grown since the last time I looked.
That's true. Caitlin says about 20 to 25 in Colorado. That's excellent. So currently in Minnesota, we are at 46 platforms that have been approved. And that's quite a bit. It's quite a lot to manage. And we definitely have been very open in approving platforms and wanting to make sure that we have a distance learning platform that meets your needs at the program level and at the student level. 5 of those platforms are state-supported licenses. The other ones can either be purchased locally or they are free. And we're not done at 46. Programs can still apply to get new platforms approved if they need to. Say they are able to get access to one through one of their partners or something like that, or there's unique curriculum within a vendor's platform. We allow for other platforms to get approved on an ongoing basis, and we'll talk about that later. So in addition to the platforms, though, we also approve teacher-created courses and piloting teacher-created lessons this year. With both the platforms and teacher-created courses, those types of distance learning can either utilize the time on task time approval method, or they can use unit mastery for the approval method, whichever the software allows them to do. And those teacher-created courses are offered through learning management systems like Schoology, Google Classroom, etc. Now, what's new for us this year is the TVM, or the teacher verification model, piloting those teacher-created lessons. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. But before we get there, let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan to talk about, within our policy, the training requirements and developments.
So one of the things we've recognized from early on with our state distance learning leadership team is that distance education is new for many teachers. If they went through their teacher training program, they may not have been introduced to the best practices in how to deliver distance education. So we have long had a training requirement for all teachers who want to count proxy hours for distance education work. And so for that, we have an online course that any staff involved in asynchronous distance education need to complete. I have also sometimes done that same training as a live training session for people who would prefer, we've got 20 people at our site, can you come out and do an in-person training? And I would cover the same content modules as the online course, but most people go through the online course. And then we have some special modules and webinars related to specific types of distance education work, such as the teacher verification model. We've done special webinars on how to build an effective course on a learning management system so you can do a teacher-created course and different things like that. And then we also do run a longer term professional development cohort called Distance Learning 101, and that is through the EdTech Center and the IDEAL Consortium. We get access to that course, and our team facilitates that cohort every other year. And on the off years, we do the Distance Learning 102 cohort. So we're offering longer term professional development for teachers who really want to dig in and go more in depth. And then our team also works on the policy development process, and that is very collaborative between my team and Brad's team at the Department of Education. And so our distance learning advisory team members and other participants from around the state send us suggestions, ask questions through our help desk. Why does the policy work this way? Or I'm trying to do this sort of thing and the policy doesn't seem to sort of fit that. And so we bring those concerns to Brad's team, and together we craft a policy that's informed by both best practices that we know from research and education, but also from what's going on in the field and we're trying to be responsive to the needs of practitioners around the state. And so we will draft a policy based on that input, and then we'll bring it to Brad's team for feedback, and we'll have a really strong policy that is reflective of the complexity that is distance education in 2021. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And so we've had a number of new initiatives and changes that have taken place over the course of the past year or year and a few months, starting in March of 2020. Brad's team started doing regular webinars across the state for managers and lead teachers, focused on adult basic education and specific responses to COVID-19 pandemic. And he always made sure to have a space in those webinars for our distance learning team to talk about new changes, opportunities, to talk about different courses that have been approved, new platforms that have been approved, all that kind of a thing. And then we also worked closely with the Department of Ed team to restructure some of the grant activities and repurpose some time and resources for the development of new tools and procedures. So we shifted some of the work that previously would have focused more on classroom technology integration and moved it over towards the distance education focus, because that was just so critical with the pandemic and what our teachers and managers around the state really needed. So one of the things we did was we revised our online required training course, and the new course is called Distance and Blended Learning Basics for Minnesota Adult Education. And it actually embeds the EdTech Center's Transforming Distance Education course modules. So that course that you saw earlier that Jen was talking about is modules 1 through 4 of our new required course. But then module 5 is all specific to Minnesota adult education procedures and policies. And then module 6 is specifically focused on the teacher verification model. And we spent a significant portion of our time this past winter working on developing that teacher verification model. And Brad is going to tell you a little bit more about that process.
Absolutely. Thanks, Susan. So Minnesota's TVM pilot, or teacher verification model pilot, focused on created lessons. It launched just in March of this year, so it's just not even a month.
Brand new.
Yes.
And in fact, we have a webinar, a certification webinar tomorrow, and we're certifying a large number of teachers.
Absolutely. And to help build this TVM model, we used background research on Arizona's, New Hampshire's, South Carolina's, Pennsylvania's, and other states' teacher verification efforts. And what we created, there is some training that's required for teachers. The training is to complete 2 online course modules, to create an approved sample teacher verification model lesson, and to participate in a live webinar. And building all of that training and building all of this, these procedures, this required a collaboration with Literacy Minnesota, Atlas, which is our professional development provider, and the Minnesota Department of Education. So we all worked very closely together to build this out. And it's important also to note that that teachers are trained and certified to create and use TVM lessons for proxy hours. We at the state level, not our team and not Susan's team, the state is not approving each and every or all individual TVM lessons after the certification. We really are front-ending a lot of this work through the training and certification so that staff are equipped at the program level, that teachers are equipped to utilize this. However, we do need some quality control. So we do have a quality control process that promotes high quality lessons and accurate proxy hour counting. That is by doing some audits of TVM lessons across the state. While we don't approve every individual TVM lesson, teachers that are using TVM lessons fill out a form online to let us know what lessons they're offering. And then we use that list to help us audit some of the TVM lessons across the state. Was it a high quality lesson? Were the proxy hours counted accurately? And it helps us also know who's using it more. Mm-hmm. Have some quality control built into our state adult education database that helps us track all of the TVM hours through this process.
And I hope you don't mind if I jump in here, Brad, but one thing to point out is that in Minnesota, our funding is tied very closely to contact hours. And so one of the concerns that we had with going with a teacher verification model is to make sure that teachers in different programs around the state are counting equivalent numbers of hours for the equivalent type of lesson. We can't have program A counting 4 hours for a lesson that program B is counting 1 hour for, because that's going to lead to discrepancies in funding. So we really need to focus on making sure that teachers have a good understanding of how many proxy hours a lesson really is appropriate for, or how many proxy hours are really appropriate for a particular lesson. And so one of the things in the certification webinar that people do is they work in small groups to workshop their lessons and come to a shared understanding of why the proxy hour award is set where it is. So we're really trying to standardize the number of proxy hours.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. And I will say that this TVM pilot, as well as the new distance and blended learning basics for Minnesota adult education course, and all of these efforts are not just to get us through the pandemic. We really are building a lot more capacity for our state system to increase the quality and increase the availability and access of our programming beyond the pandemic and into the future here. So I'm really excited about a lot of this work. Susan, do you want to take it on the, do you want to move us to the next slide and talk about our process?
So it is a little bit confusing when we've got all these different options for people, right? We have state-supported platforms. We have other platforms that you can use. We have teacher created courses, we have teacher verification model. So if a teacher out in a program is thinking, hey, I want to get this thing approved so I can get proxy hours counted for it, how do they know that they're in the right process and are using the right form and are submitting it in the way that will actually get it approved? So to clarify that, we have created a flow chart that helps people walk through what kind of thing are you submitting and making sure they get directed to the right form and the right process. So you can see an example of what that looks like on your slide here, and you can also download it from our Literacy Minnesota website on the Distance Learning Policies and Procedures page, which I believe Long has posted in the text chat for you. And you can go ahead to the next slide. So we're going to pause here. I know we're pretty short on time, but I do want to take a few minutes just to think about reflecting on what you've heard us present about and which ideas would you like to try out in your state, and which would you like to learn more about. And please just post those in the text chat box. We don't have a poll for you because they're open-ended questions. So just go ahead and put those in the chat. And I would also like to point out that our colleague Astrid Leiden from the Minnesota Department of Education is here with us today. And she's also been highly involved in the teacher verification model and can answer questions about that as well as I can or Brad can. So feel free to weigh in the text chat, Astrid. And Megan posts that she would like to know more about the requirements of virtual platforms to make them allowable. And so we have an application form that folks fill out, and it includes a number of different things, such as standards alignment and different kinds of, does it have instruction, practice, and assessment components? So it's not straight, just sort of drill type application. We prefer strongly the ones that have the time on task tracking. We do approve unit mastery products as well, but we feel that the time on task tracking is a bit more accurate, so we tend to prefer those. That's a place to start, hopefully. But the application itself is on our website. So if you wanted to look at the application, you could do that, and that would give you an idea of what all we're looking for. And let's see. Daniel posted that we would like to create a training program in North Carolina like you have in Minnesota for the teacher verification model. And I think later on in the session, Long will be posting our email addresses, and you can definitely connect with us and we'd be happy to work with you on that. So let's move ahead to the next slide since we only have a few minutes remaining. And I just want to mention that we have some links, resources that are available to you in the links collection that can really help you dig deeper and learn more about this topic. So ones that you might want to look for are Ready, Set, Go, Steps to Rapidly Start Distance Learning, Teaching Online, Communicating and Tracking Learner Progress, Changing the Equation, Empowering Adult Learners with EdTech, and then, of course, the IDEAL Distance Education and Blended Learning Handbook, which is now on the links resources page, as well as the EdTech Center site. And I think I'm going to turn it over now to Marcella to facilitate the final text chat.
Great, thank you. Daniel noted we only approved the time on task in North Carolina. I've gotten several of the software manufacturers to add time on task specifically for North Carolina, which is great. Thanks for sharing that information in case other states are interested in learning more about how to use that for themselves. Are there any other questions for any of our facilitator or any of our presenters today? I know we covered a lot of information, so I just want to give you a moment longer to pause and reflect. Wonderful. Okay, so it sounds like, Daniel, you've been getting a lot of support for your efforts from both Susan and Brad. So I do want to make sure you see those. And it looks like there are no other questions. So if we can just go to our next chat, I wanted to share with you some information about next month's webinar. So today's webinar was part of our new links series that is a part of our universal level of technical assistance that we are offering to states through links. Next month's webinar will be held on May 26th at the same time, 3 p.m. It will be on digital literacy, and Long has posted the link to register in the chat. I encourage you to go ahead and register now so that you get that on your calendar right away. And our presenter, Kathy Harris, has asked for some input from all of you to find out, or to help ensure that our presentation, or her presentation rather, meets your needs and really helps you and supports you. So if you could please share with us in our final moments together, what questions about digital literacy do you want addressed in our next webinar? This is your opportunity to ensure that any questions that you have on digital literacy, our expert is able to answer for you. And she wanted to be able to plan appropriately. Okay, so Maureen shared how to assess skills. Great. Embedding into instruction of academic skills, engaging low literacy learners. I know that's often a challenge, Caitlin. What are staff digital literacy skill requirements and training in different states? Great question, Astrid. I hope that she'll address that. I'll bring that up with her. Maureen asked about ELL learners and digital skills. How to train instructors. Yes, that's a great question. Another great question, Gay. So Daniel, that's another great question, although not related to the question on the slide. We will be posting the recording of this webinar on our on the Links YouTube channel. We hope to get this turned around fairly quickly for you because we know it's a topic of great interest. All right, so if as you continue to think about in our last moment together, if you have any other questions you would like our presenter to address in next month's webinar on digital literacy, please go ahead and post those in the chat. If not, I want to share with you some information on how to contact our presenters. Jen Vanek can be reached at jen_vanek@worlded.org. The website for them is edtech.worlded.org. Brad Hasskamp can be reached at brad.hasskamp@state.mn.us. And the website for his organization, the Department of Education for Minnesota, is education.mn.gov. Susan Wetenkamp-Brandt can be reached at swbrandt@literacymn.org. And her website there is www.literacymn.org. With that, I want to thank our fantastic presenters. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Susan. It's always fantastic to hear from you, Jen, about the global perspective of what states across the country are doing on this topic. And Brad and Susan, I really appreciated the perspective you brought on what you are doing specifically in Minnesota. I know I learned so much, and I hope everyone else did as well. Thank you all for attending, and we hope that you'll join us at our next webinar.